Welcome to Stories Room. Enjoy listening and don't forget to subscribe. Scott Peterson owned a small but bustling auto repair shop on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas. Grease-stained floors, the metallic ring of wrenches, and the low murmur of engines constituted the only world he'd ever loved since his teenage years. His loyal crew, two grizzled mechanics named Reggie and Cole, treated him like family. And until recently, that sense of loyalty had grounded Scott in every aspect of life. He was also married. His wife, Rachel, was an ambitious real estate agent carving her way up the ranks of an elite firm. They had been together for 7 years, a period Scott fondly described as a testament to teamwork, unwavering devotion, and shared dreams. They had a cozy suburban house, a golden retriever named Lucy, and a sense of security he believed to be bulletproof. That belief cracked one Friday evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Rachel had called to say she'd be working late again. Scott, who had closed up the shop hours earlier, was home in time to prepare steaks, her favorite dinner. He set the table by candlelight, only to watch the food grow cold. The clock showed nearly midnight when she finally sauntered in, claiming exhaustion from a marathon client meeting. But something in her eyes, in the clipped way she spoke, in the faint whiff of an unfamiliar cologne on her blouse, didn't add up. It was as if she were reciting lines to a script. Scott asked gently if she was okay. She answered with a hasty, "I'm fine," then slipped away upstairs, carrying her laptop like a shield. That night, Scott tried to close his eyes, but couldn't escape the gnawing thought that Rachel's late hours had become alarmingly frequent and suspicious. Where once they stayed up late talking about life and the future, now she claimed deadlines, demanding clients, and phone calls that made her leave the room. A cold, rigid distance replaced the warmth in her voice. He had the terrifying sense that the fortress he cherished, their marriage, was about to crumble. He had no idea how devastating the collapse would be. Scott kept his suspicions to himself for a while. He still had faith in Rachel, telling himself he'd been overreacting. Perhaps real estate had grown more competitive, or her boss was ruthlessly piling on responsibilities. But his concern only deepened when, one evening, she returned home after midnight, her lipstick smudged, hair disheveled in an uncharacteristic way. She barely managed a murmured apology before disappearing into the shower. All weekend, she avoided conversations that dug too deeply into her workload. She even waved off Lucy, their usually beloved retriever, as the dog happily bounded toward her. Rachel seemed haunted, or maybe just unreachable. At the auto shop, though, Scott was known for his calm under pressure. He told no one the details about Rachel, only becoming a bit quieter with each passing day. "Boss, you sure you're all right?" asked Reggie, but Scott simply shrugged and turned away. Inevitably, Scott decided he had to know the truth. He waited until a Tuesday night when Rachel texted that she'd be working extra late. With a sense of dread, he climbed into his pickup around 11 and drove downtown to her office building. Under the yellow glow of the streetlights, he spotted her car already leaving the parking garage, with a man in the passenger seat. Tense, Scott followed. A short drive through neon-lit Dallas streets led them to a luxury hotel. He watched from a distance as Rachel exited the driver's side, smiling at her passenger. When this stranger put his arm around her waist, something inside Scott caved. Shaken by betrayal and fury, he nearly slammed his foot on the accelerator, itching to confront them. But the calmer side of him realized he needed proof. Raw confrontation in a public hotel could backfire. So, Scott sat in the pickup for a solid 40 minutes, adrenaline pumping, until the pair reemerged. He saw that man's hand slide down the small of Rachel's back, intimately guiding her toward the car. Their closeness left no doubt in his mind. His phone suddenly buzzed. "Rachel." "Hey, Han," she said, voice steady. "Work ran late. Again. I'm coming home now." "All right," Scott managed, forcing his tone to remain neutral. "Drive safe." A rage-saturated hollowness hollowed him out. One devastating truth took root. Rachel was cheating. What happened next was inevitable. Scott confronted Rachel at dawn in their living room, the fatigue etched into his features replaced by cold determination. "I followed you," he said quietly, arms folded. "Saw you and him at that hotel. You want to tell me how that's just work?" Rachel froze mid-step. Her eyes widened, then narrowed with a mixture of fear and irritation. For a split second, he thought he glimpsed a glint of defiance. "You had no right," she hissed, then tried to soften her tone. "Scott, let me explain." But as she stumbled through her excuses, "He's a client. We had to settle a big deal. The hotel was convenient." Her words rang hollow. Scott stared, incredulous, as she tried to gloss over the betrayal he'd witnessed with his own eyes. "A client who puts his arm around you like that," he bit out. "Who shares those midnight smiles and doesn't bother hiding how intimate you are." A stark silence followed. Eventually, Rachel glowered at him, tears wetting her lashes. "Fine," she snapped. "You want the truth? I'm bored, Scott. You're always at that shop. He pays attention to me." Her voice shook with anger and perhaps shame, but Scott couldn't see beyond the tempest raging inside him. With a trembling exhale, he realized that the woman he loved had just admitted to seeking thrills outside their marriage. Their heated exchange escalated, voices ricocheting off the living room walls. When Lucy poked her head around the corner, ears flattened, Scott's chest tightened. He didn't want the dog to sense his turmoil, but it was far too late. The household had erupted into heartbreak and betrayal. Within a week, everyone close to them felt the shift. Rachel, resentful at being cornered, doubled down at work, staying out later, refusing to communicate openly. Scott, caught between grief and fury, began to consider an array of responses. Confrontation with the other man, humiliating Rachel publicly, or burying himself in the day-to-day tasks of the auto shop until the emotional storm passed. Some nights, he even pictured the pleasure of retribution, of seeing her regret every deception. One afternoon, Rachel's lover, Logan Winslow, as Scott eventually learned, had the nerve to text him from her phone some vague threat about "stop stalking us, or you'll regret it." That text, read in the greasy office of Scott's workshop, electrified his anger. He crushed the phone in his hand so hard the screen threatened to crack. That's when a plan began to form. A dark plan he wasn't sure he'd ever have the guts to carry out. Unable to eat or sleep properly, Scott let his anger grow, fueling each breath. He knew revenge might be an ugly road, but the image of Logan Winslow touching Rachel haunted him relentlessly. He started by doing mild recon. With a bit of online searching, he learned Logan was no mere coworker. He was a high-powered real estate investor, rumored to manipulate markets to his advantage. He was wealthy, untouchable, a roving playboy who boasted about taking what he wanted. The rumored stories about his personal life, parties, affairs, the women he had chewed up and discarded, disgusted Scott. That was the man who now took his wife to hotels at midnight. In the old days, Scott might have confronted Logan in a burst of fists and anger. But the thought of a more strategic revenge flickered. The idea of dismantling Logan's success brick by brick, of humiliating him so thoroughly that no wealth or reputation could cushion the blow, burned in Scott's mind like a brand. But the more he contemplated it, the more two contradictory impulses tore him apart. A longing for revenge against the man who invaded his marriage, and a grief-ridden wish to restore the woman he still loved, despite her betrayal. Late one night, as Scott was finishing up in the workshop, he heard a timid knock. Opening the door, he recognized a familiar face. Stacy, a friend of his cousin who sometimes brought her car in for repairs. Her usually bright smile was missing. She looked worried. "Scott, is everything okay?" she asked. "I heard rumors some big drama with your wife." Caught off guard, he hesitated. Stacy was warm-hearted, known for offering help to just about everyone she met. So he invited her in. Over cheap coffee in styrofoam cups, he found himself telling her the story, grudgingly at first, then pouring it all out, from his heartbreak to the swirl of revenge fantasies. Stacy listened quietly. "I don't blame you for being furious," she said gently. "But be careful. It's easy to let anger consume you." He studied her kind expression, noticing for the first time how her empathy eased the crushing weight on his chest. He realized how starved he was for sincere human connection. They talked late into the night, eventually lapsing into silence as the clock edged past 2 a.m. Before she left, Stacy pressed her phone number into his hand and offered a soft smile. "Call me if you need a friend. I mean, it's Scott." It was a simple gesture, but one that sparked a feeling of warmth, something he hadn't felt in weeks. Only a few days later, Rachel and Logan unwisely tested Scott's patience. Around midnight, while heading home from a supplier's warehouse, Scott passed by the same luxury hotel. Sure enough, there was Rachel's car, parked in almost the exact spot as before. Fury hammered at his ribs, adrenaline seizing his limbs. He stepped out of his truck and marched into the marble lobby, ignoring the wide eyes of the front desk clerk. The elevator ride to the 10th floor felt like an eternity. He prowled the hushed corridor until he heard low voices behind one suite's door. Rachel's laugh. Scott pounded on the door so hard the walls shook. It flung open to reveal a shirtless Logan, startled but quickly contorting his features into arrogant disdain. Behind him, Rachel stood wearing only a robe, eyes wide and furious at Scott's intrusion. "Time to face me like a man," Scott snarled, pushing his way in. "No more shadows." Logan raised an eyebrow. "This is private property," he sneered. "Get out before I call security." Rachel tried to intervene, eyes darting between them in panic. But Scott had already balled up his fists, the tension of weeks about to explode. He stared Logan down, forcing himself to hold back from throwing the first punch. "You," Scott hissed at Logan, voice trembling with rage. "You think you can just take whatever you want?" A scornful laugh bubbled from Logan's throat. "That's exactly what I do." Scott nearly lunged, but a brutal truth stopped him. If he started a brawl now, he might end up in jail while Logan walked free. So he sneered back, voice eerily calm. "You'll regret this. Both of you." He fixed Rachel with a last withering glare, heartbreak flickering in his eyes. Then he turned on his heel and left, mind spinning with the promise he intended to keep. They would both regret it. Scott wasted no time. He'd gleaned enough about Logan's shady deals to suspect there were skeletons in the man's closet. Through an acquaintance in local law enforcement, Scott started feeding tips about potentially illegal real estate transactions, unethical bidding wars, and hush-money payoffs Logan had used to push certain deals through. For weeks, he quietly handed over every crumb of evidence he could find. At the same time, Scott discovered that Rachel, enamored with her wealthy new partner, had allowed Logan to deposit large sums in a joint account she'd opened. To the outside world, it might look as though she was party to his financial manipulations. If the authorities took notice, she'd go down too. A voice in Scott's head whispered that this was too far. Should he really condemn the woman he once loved to possible legal trouble? But each time he hesitated, he remembered the smirking triumph on Logan's face. He remembered how Rachel had shrugged off his devotion. The desire for vengeance hardened him like steel. Soon, the fire was lit. Rumors spread of a forthcoming investigation into Logan's business empire. Law enforcement tapped into suspicious bank transactions. Rachel, sensing that Logan's star might be falling, tried to placate him, which only made Logan more arrogant and cruel. He railed at her to fix whatever was happening. And Scott Peterson, quiet mechanic from a small repair shop, was the one who'd stacked the deck against them both. While orchestrating Logan's downfall behind the scenes, Scott felt an unexpected tug in his chest. He found himself texting Stacy, meeting her occasionally at a nearby coffee shop or walking Lucy in the park together. She was a balm to his wounded spirit, asking nothing except honesty. Little by little, he realized he was forging a deeper bond with her, an unspoken closeness that extended beyond mere friendship. One evening, After too many hours spent hunched over documents that might incriminate Logan, Scott found himself at Stacy's doorstep, shoulders tense and eyes hollow. Without a word, she let him in and guided him to the couch. Her living room felt warm, the soft scent of vanilla candles easing his agitation. "Tell me everything," she said, and so he did. From the confrontation at the hotel, to the stifling desire to see Logan ruined, to the pang of guilt whenever he thought about punishing Rachel. He admitted that while he burned for vengeance, another part of him was drowning in sorrow for the marriage he'd lost. He didn't know how to reconcile the two. Stacy offered no easy answers, only a compassionate ear and the warmth of her presence. When tears finally overcame Scott, she held him, stroking his hair as if to soothe an ache that went beyond betrayal. And in the hush of that moment, they kissed, a hesitant, searching kiss that quickly unraveled into passion. In each other's arms, they discovered not just comfort, but a sense of hope. For the first time in weeks, Scott felt he had found a glimmer of light in the darkness. But the next day, the storm truly broke. The authorities formally launched an investigation into Logan Winslow's firm, freezing certain accounts, including the joint one he shared with Rachel. The local news started airing segments on potential misconduct in high-end real estate. Rachel, blindsided at work, rushed home in a panic, only to find Scott absent. When she called, he refused to pick up. Her voicemails cascaded from tearful pleas to resentful fury, demanding he explain what he did. She suspected he played some part in Logan's troubles. After all, who else had reason to orchestrate such a takedown? Logan also lashed out. He left scathing messages on Scott's phone. "Watch your back, mechanic. This isn't over." Still, Scott felt only a cool satisfaction. Their once invincible fortress was crumbling, and he had lit the match. The revenge he had so carefully conceived began to unfold like a well-directed play. Every headline about Logan's impropriety, every rumor of possible indictments, was a new stanza in the poem of retribution. Yet as the headlines piled up, a part of him wasn't rejoicing. His stomach churned as Rachel's voice in a final message cracked with desperation. "Scott, please call me. I am scared." Scott, torn by remorse, struggled to decide if he should go through with letting the entire weight of the investigation crush Rachel as well. He had wanted her to suffer, yes, but the possibility of prison or financial ruin felt almost too cruel. This was, after all, the same woman who once made him laugh until he cried, the woman he had daydreamed about building a future with. He wrestled with himself for hours in his workshop office, the clang of tools and hiss of compressors echoing behind closed doors. Reggie and Cole kept noticing the tension, but knew better than to ask. Late that night, perched on a stack of tires outside the shop, he realized he had two doors in front of him. Door one, let the avalanche continue. Rachel and Logan both get entangled in the legal fiasco, forced to face the consequences of their affair and financial misdeeds. Door two, step in, mitigate the damage for Rachel. Maybe even cooperate with her lawyers to prove she was manipulated by Logan. She might escape unscathed, or at least walk away with minimal repercussions. Could he forgive her at all? Or was saving her simply the last vestige of the heart that once loved her? Torn, he felt an urgent need for clarity. He dialed Stacy's number. "I'm at the shop," he said quietly. "Can you come?" Stacy arrived in jeans and a sweatshirt, hair pulled into a quick ponytail. A serious expression shadowed her normally cheerful face. They sat on a bench just inside the open garage door, the night air cool against their skin. Scott confessed the details of his revenge plan, how it had grown more destructive than he'd initially anticipated. "I wanted them both to pay," he said, eyes haunted. "But Rachel's not some hardened criminal. She was just unfaithful, heartbreakingly unfaithful. Now I might ruin her life forever." Stacy studied him a long moment. "I can't decide for you, Scott," she replied softly. "All I can say is, think about how you'll feel if Rachel faces criminal charges. Will that really bring you peace? He lowered his head. The desire for satisfaction warred with compassion he'd never quite shaken. He inhaled, letting Stacy's warmth steady his unraveling mind. Finally, he made a choice. I'll spare her, just her, he said, voice shaking. But Logan gets no mercy. Stacy placed a hand on his shoulder. He leaned into the comfort of that touch. By the time she left, he was resolved. Rachel would be offered a way out. Logan, on the other hand, would face the retribution he so brazenly invited. The very next day, Scott made an anonymous call to Rachel's legal counsel, providing documents showing that Logan had tricked her into transferring funds for deals that were part of his bigger scheme. Evidence that her involvement was minimal, enough to cast doubt on any shared guilt. Rachel, stunned, realized someone had effectively rescued her. She sensed immediately it had to be Scott and left him a voicemail, breath ragged with tears and gratitude. Scott, thank you. I don't know why you did it, but I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. Meanwhile, Logan found himself cornered. His personal accounts, laden with questionable transactions, were locked. His sure-thing acquisitions went under investigation. A press conference was scheduled, at which prosecutors hinted that an indictment against Logan Winslow might be forthcoming. Scott gleaned all of this from the local news, a grim satisfaction simmering in his chest. During those tense days, Scott and Rachel never met in person. She had retreated to her sister's place upstate, rummaging for ways to rebuild her shattered life. Scott stayed in Dallas, running the shop, forging a quiet connection with Stacy. If Rachel still had illusions about winning him back, she never voiced them. And so the revenge that Scott had unleashed settled like dust over the city. Logan's empire cracked, lawsuits swirled, bank accounts dried up. The man's arrogance collapsed under the weight of his own misdeeds. Rachel, scarred by the affair, managed to slip free of criminal entanglement, but not the stain on her reputation or the harsh lessons she'd learned. 3 months later, life in Dallas took on a new shape. Scott's business was flourishing, partly because his small-town honesty appealed to customers who shunned the shady corporate feel of bigger repair franchises. Reggie and Cole joked that the shop now had more cars lined up for service than they'd ever seen. Stacy's presence became a comforting constant in Scott's world. She took Lucy for walks while Scott worked, joined him on coffee runs, and listened whenever nightmares of Rachel and Logan came creeping back. There were nights they slipped into each other's arms, both seeking solace that only grew into a genuine, caring bond. Rachel, meanwhile, stayed away. Through cautious text messages, she let him know she was renting a modest apartment and quietly continuing in real estate on a smaller scale. She was contrite, evidently not expecting or even asking for forgiveness. One day she texted, "I know I can't undo what I did. I just pray you find happiness. You deserve it." Scott read the message twice, heart pounding with a bittersweet ache. A part of him would always care for her, remember the good years. But their marriage was beyond repair, severed by mutual heartbreak and a savage quest for revenge. He offered no reply. There was nothing left to say. That evening, he sat on the hood of a freshly repaired Mustang behind the shop, gazing at the Texan sunset. Stacy joined him, linking her fingers with his. Warmth spread through him, chasing away the persistent shadows of the past. In that stillness, he found clarity. Yes, he had achieved vengeance, dismantled Logan's empire, and kept Rachel from jail. Yet the real victory lay in reclaiming his own life, discovering that he could still feel warmth, love, and purpose despite the betrayals that had once seemed insurmountable. "You okay?" Stacy asked, noticing the distant look in his eyes. "Yeah," he replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I think so." And as the sun slid beneath the horizon, painting the sky in fiery gold and orange, Scott Peterson let go of bitterness. He might never forget the pain, nor truly forgive the betrayal, but he had found something better. Freedom from the lie that once passed as perfection, and a new sense of hope in a life he could shape on his own terms. The slow hum of an engine rolled past on the street, and the faint clang of a tool echoed from inside the shop. For the first time in a long time, Scott smiled, genuinely, peacefully, knowing that after all the drama and the satisfying burn of revenge, he was finally free to start again. That's the end of our story. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on new stories and share this video so others can discover these great stories too.